He said that he'll raise the ceiling, but he hasn't said what the rate will be. Okay?
He has committed to raising rates. Look, as I say, this is in the context of reforming Social Security, which is what would happen 25 years from now. John McCain himself is on record saying he would consider raising the payroll tax. So you cannot put forward discussions about Social Security financing 25 years from now as if these are the discussions about what do we want the tax policy to be this year in response to recession. It's crazy. Further, it isn't, Barack Obama specifically said that when capital gains goes back to rates that they were in the 90s, which is the overriding theme of his tax policy, is that let us have tax relief for 95% of workers and let the rates for those over $250,000 go back to what they were in the 90s. On capital gains, most of the 90s it was at 28. The end of the 90s was at 20. He has personally, he's closer to the bottom of the range, so capital gains go to something, let's say 20, 22. And he specifically said dividends would go to the same rate as capital gains. So we're either going to get into a game of fear where they're going to get up and say, he's going to raise, and if he had his way, he'd raise the tax rate to 9,000%. And I have a secret bird that's told me that is his policy, regardless of what his economic advisor says the policy is.
You're right. On Social Security, he hasn't said. On Social Security, he just hasn't said, and as you say, neither has McCain. But let me put this to you. You know, we've had barrage and counter-barrage, and you're both, implying, through your manner that, this is a hugely significant issue. Do we get President McCain, do we get Obama? According to the tax, and you've just been talking about taxes. According to the Tax Policy Center, nonpartisan outfit, Obama is planning to cut taxes by $2.7 trillion. McCain is planning to cut taxes by $3.7 trillion relative to current law. And the difference is almost entirely on the extra taxes that a tiny sliver of the population of the US will have to pay. Now, whatever you think about the merits of that, is that all it comes down to? I mean, is that really all that's at stake in this election? The difference between a $2.7 trillion tax cut and a $3.7 trillion tax cut?
Look, it's a good question. I don't think it is for the following reason. If you're not a real budget wonk, you can plug your ears. The following may not be that interesting. Much of that determination has to do with what is your baseline. Okay, so the budget invention, which we would characterize as a gimmick that is created coming out of the Bush budgets, was the making of a lot of tax cuts temporary so that they wouldn't count in the budget window as costing very much money, but they would be signed into law that if you just play things out, a whole bunch of tax cuts expire. Now, relative to that world where all of the Bush tax cuts expire, it costs money to extend them for ordinary Americans. If you ask, however, okay, you've proposed for program, if you take as a more reasonable baseline a patch on the AMT, for example, extending the Bush tax cuts just for the people making less than $250,000, this same analysis you cited shows that Barack Obama's budget is paid for, that his tax plan does not increase the deficit relative to that scenario. It shows that even in the fudged tax policy that McCain gave to them, and I will point out to you that the New York Times and other budget experts who looked at it said they believe there's at least $1.5 trillion of additional tax cuts for very high-income people that McCain has proposed that they didn't give to the Tax Policy Center. You're looking at a situation where Obama provides large tax relief to the vast majority of Americans who are the ones facing the squeeze and whose problems have led us into the slowdown we are in. And McCain's program, 1/4 of his tax cuts go to people making almost $3 million a year or more. Now, what is the point? Why are we doing that? While simultaneously increasing the deficit by about $300 billion per year more than Obama does. I don't think it's a trivial matter. You're saying, is it really just the difference between 2.7 and 3.7. It's bigger than that, and the who's benefiting is really quite important. In Obama's program, the tax cuts for the middle class are 3 times bigger than McCain's. That analysis shows it. And it's just your focus. Do you think that the thing that we should do is repeat the same thing we just did for the last 8 years times 2, so they're twice as big and twice as regressive as the Bush tax cuts in the McCain plan? Do you think that will work? My question is, how has the last 8 years of that worked out for you? And the answer is, not very well. We had we've had 2 recessions / major slowdowns with one rather anemic recovery in between, which was the first recovery in U.S. history where the median family's income actually fell over the course of the boom.
Right.
That's not a track record that you want to pursue. So I actually think it's important.
But I know you don't think that is because of the Bush tax cuts.
I believe that, well, there are too many negatives.
Well,
I do think the Bush tax approach, where you have resources and rather than focus them on the people struggling, which could have resolved many of those issues of the last 8 years, to instead focus that on very, very high income people, is responsible for not preventing this thing from getting worse. So yes, I am putting some of the blame on the Bush tax cuts.
All right.